welcome you. My name is William Alford at Harvard Law School, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to welcome you. As many of you know, Harvard has had a long history of productive interaction with the Chinese world, irrespective of location and jurisdiction. For more than a century and a half, people have, from Caleb Cushing to Roscoe Pound to John Fairbank, gone out from Harvard to East Asia and had considerable impact on America's interaction with China. Conversely, large numbers of people have come from the Chinese world to Harvard for education, both for themselves and in terms of enlightening us, and then return to have a consequential impact back home. In recent years, one thinks of as rich an array of people, for example, as Yu Guohua, Chen Changwen, and my classmates, Ma Yingzhou and Lu Shaolian, all of whom have played a major role in U.S. interaction with China, with Taiwan. Unfortunately, the U.S. media have not focused enough attention on developments within Taiwan, in spite of the academic tradition. And they should have, because, as you know, Taiwan is today the world's 13th largest trading jurisdiction and is increasingly intertwined with the U.S. commercially, diplomatically, culturally, and in other ways. But our reasons for paying attention to Taiwan ought not to be limited only to this important economic nexus. In recent years, the process of democratization and peaceful broadening of the base of power has been underway there that is something of an example for many other parts of the world. And yet, as is often the case, notwithstanding these noteworthy advances, there is a strong call these days in Taiwan for yet further democratization, yet further institutional change, as evidenced in the current election campaign, the upcoming constitutional revisions, and indeed the whole type of question which we will be discussing tonight of the future and nature of Taiwan. Beyond these reasons, there are other, for those of us who are more academic, other noteworthy, important things to study, some of which I hope we will touch on tonight, pertaining to Taiwan. Questions of how economic, political, and legal change interact, questions of how a Chinese society retains what's important about traditional values while modernizing, and questions of how Taiwan continues to progress economically as the very type of growth of low-cost, low-wage, high-pollution products is no longer possible to sustain it in the future. I'm very pleased to say, as I had alluded to earlier, that Harvard has not ignored Taiwan and not ignored these kinds of issues. Just to give you one or two illustrations before we get down to business today, Harvard's Center for International Affairs recently inaugurated the K.T. Lee Lecture Series, and it's had distinguished visitors from Taiwan to fill that, most notably Foreign Minister Qian Fu earlier this year. Harvard schools, from public health to law to the Fairbanks Center, have played an increasingly important role in educating specialists on Taiwan. And my own school, the law school, just in the last year, has had a very broad array of speakers, from Ding Mo-shi to Qian Fu to DPP Secretary General Tai Shiyuan, Kan Yanxiang, Ambassador Lilly, AIT head Nate Balachi, and others. Now, tonight we are very, very fortunate to have with us a superb speaker and two very learned commentators who will address some of the types of issues to which I've just referred, and many others crucial to the future of Taiwan. Our principal speaker tonight is Dr. Peng Mingmin, who is an extraordinary figure by any standard in world history. He was born in Taiwan, educated really throughout the world, educated in Tokyo University, National Taiwan University, McGill, Paris, and informally in the United States as well. He served as chair of the political science department at Taida and advisor to the ROC United Nations delegation years ago. But due to a falling out over the kinds of issues that we will be speaking about tonight, he was in 1964 arrested and charged with sedition, again to do with writings of his concerning issues of Taiwan independence. He was convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison which term was later converted to house arrest. In 1970, he left Taiwan and fled to Sweden, where he was granted asylum and subsequently came to the United States, first to be visiting professor at Michigan, later at Wright State University, and then subsequently, and I believe to this time, has been president of the Asian Pacific Council on Democracy. Our second speaker, and really more in the way of a commentator, is Ambassador James Lilly, known to many of you here at the Kennedy School. After overcoming the initial handicap of a Yale education, he has had a nice guy in spite of it. He's had a model career in America's foreign service. Indeed, I think it's fair to say he has held more important posts in the American diplomatic service in East Asia than any other person in the 200-year history of the United States. He's been head of our mission in Taiwan, ambassador to Korea, ambassador to the PRC, and held a number of other important positions. He's been this semester at the Kennedy School, but been very generous with his time and coming to speak to people throughout the university. And he's off soon to serve his country again as Assistant Secretary, I believe, for International Affairs, Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Affairs. Our other speaker tonight is also an eminent and distinguished individual, Director General James Zhang, or Zhang Wenzhong, of the CCNAA Boston affiliate. He was born in Sichuan and educated at Taida, I think roughly the same time that Dr. Peng was on the faculty. And he has a rich and extensive diplomatic career in Africa and the United States. He was, among many important posts, for example, Director of the Department of Consular Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the ROC. And he has been in Boston since 1990, heading the CCNAA office here, and I can speak from personal experience, has done a superb and excellent job at working with academics interested in East Asia to present a full and fair picture of life in the ROC. One last word, and I will turn the floor over to Dr. Peng. Our format for this evening will be first to hear from Dr. Peng, then to allow each of our commentators to take perhaps 10 to 15 minutes to offer their views, opinions, criticisms, questions, and then to open the floor to you for questions from the audience. I do ask, and I will remind you later, that in taking questions from the audience, I hope that if people feel comfortable, they will identify who they are and what their institutional affiliation is. So without further ado, let me turn to Dr. Peng, our principal speaker for this evening.
Thank you, Professor Alford. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very delighted to be here tonight. I'd like to thank the sponsors, the Institute of Politics, Asian Students Caucus, and the Republic of China Students Club for providing us this opportunity to meet here together. And also I'd like to thank Christine Wang, who has been working very hard. She has been contacted with me many times and worked out the detail of my coming up here from Oregon. I am especially pleased to have Professor Lilly with us tonight here. I believe no one in the States has deeper understanding and more thorough knowledge of the Taiwan issue than him. His interest, his knowledge of Taiwan issue is not merely intellectual one. He has been actually dealing with the issue on political, realistic, and diplomatic level. I came from Oregon, which was very warm, and suddenly I was here last night and I immediately got cold. If we look at the world map today, we may say it is pretty well locked up. The frontier, the boundaries of each nation state is clearly drawn. The territories of each nation state is very well defined. the question as to which portion of the world belongs to which country, which government is entitled to govern whom, govern where, this question is well settled. There is very few territorial disputes in the world today, but unfortunately, Taiwan is one of those very few spots in the world where the question of sovereignty still being raised, disputed, and unsettled. Taiwan is about the size of Netherlands, situated between Japan, China, Philippines, separated from China by Taiwan Strait or Formosa Strait, about 100 miles wide. If you look at the history, 400-year history of this island, one may say it is a history of continuous international dispute as to who has a right to own this island, which government is entitled to exercise the sovereignty over this island. The dispute, which is still continuing today. The current dispute on Taiwan is a fateful legacy of the Second World War and the civil war in China between communists and Chinese nationalists. Just for a moment, let us go back very briefly the situation or political history before this century, before Second World War. Chinese began to immigrate in the 16th century to Taiwan. In 17th century, Dutch, Spanish too, established their own settlements. By 19th century, China claimed Taiwan to be a part of its province. But China has never exercised full control of the whole island. Taiwan presented to China nothing but trouble. Internally, there is repeated uprising, rebellion. Internationally, there was a series of incidents, international incidents, which embarrassed China. War broke out between China and Japan in 1894. China was defeated, and China ceded Taiwan to Japan in 1895. In fact, it is with big sigh of relief that China gets rid of this troublesome island. So, since 1895, Taiwan became a colony of Japan until the end of the Second World War. Japanese colonial rule in Taiwan was harsh and brutal, but efficient. In 50 years, Japan built Taiwan from one of the most backward area in Asia to one of the most industrialized, most developed society in Asia. The literacy already reached one of the highest in Asia before 1945, when in 1945 Japan surrendered. The Allied power directed Chinese nationalist army to occupy Taiwan. Since then, since 1945, Chinese nationalist government has been ruling Taiwan until today. The current dispute in legal terms is to whom Taiwan belongs, or rather to whom should Taiwan belong. In simpler word, the dispute is who has a right to own this government? Which government, or rather, what kind of government is entitled to exercise sovereignty over this land and its people? There are 4 principles in this dispute. One, of course, the nationalist government in Taiwan today. Second, 20 million population on the island. Third, Chinese Communist regime in Peking. And fourth, of course, the United States government. First, nationalist government. The nation of Taiwan is a mixture of economic acumen and bizarre political myth and fiction. Although the size is limited, Taiwan's size is rather limited, but we all know its economic development and prosperity have been one of the wonder and envy of the entire world. In spite of its relatively small size, its per capita income ranked 25th in the world. The volume of foreign trade ranked 13 in the world, and it is the holder of the largest foreign exchange reserve in the world, larger than Japan, reaching 80 billion foreign exchange reserve. It is ironic and paradoxical that this extraordinary economic achievement was realized under the government based on fiction and myth. This is a government defeated in Chinese Civil War in 1949 and came to Taiwan in exile. But for almost 50 years, more than 4 decades, in spite of this fact, this government still cling to the fiction that this is a government of the whole China, and cling to the myth that it is going to, quote unquote, unify China one day. With those fiction and myths, until 5 years ago, Taiwan has been under martial law. This government ruled Taiwan with martial law for nearly 4 decades. With this fiction and myth, this government still claims Taiwan is a part of this fictional, mystical China. Now, this population, 20 million, how are they? For many years, they have been building up a long list of political grievances. Under martial law, until 5 years ago, there has been no normal, healthy political life in Taiwan. For too long, their constitutional guarantees has been suppressed. For too long, those people have been excluded from the participation in the formation of basic national policy of Taiwan government. For too long, their wish and aspiration has been suppressed and punished. To them, today, to say that Taiwan is part of China, to them, it is a very flagrant violation of their basic rights. Now, third principle of this dispute, Chinese Communist government. Since its victory in Chinese Civil War in 1949, they vowed to, quote unquote, liberate Taiwan although their strategy may have changed, but basically remain the same. Even today, they threaten to use force, if necessary, to annex Taiwan. This is their unchanged position. Fourth, U.S. position. As we know, U.S. position is basically based on two documents. One is Shanghai Communique in 1972. The second is Taiwan Relations Act in 1979. Basing on these two documents, American position is, first, it acknowledges Chinese claim that Taiwan is a part of China and does not challenge this Chinese position. But U.S. stressed its importance or its interest in seeing this solution, this problem must be solved in peaceful way, peaceful solution of the Taiwan issue. And also, it stressed the U.S. interest in the preservation and enhancement of the basic human rights of the people on Taiwan. So, U.S. is not taking any position as to what kind of solution it prefers, but only insist that the solution must be peaceful. So here is a situation. Chinese communists say Taiwan must belong to China, and if necessary, it's going to use force to achieve this objective. Nationalist government in Taiwan also say Taiwan belongs to China, but not present communist China, but to some fictional, mystical China, which does not exist today. And people on Taiwan are complaining that their wish has been ignored, their aspiration has been denied, they are not respected. And U.S. is saying that U.S. position is basically, it's called handoff policy, so far as I understand, handoff policy, that we don't take any, we don't have any preference as to what kind of solution, but this problem must be solved by the party directly concerned with peaceful mind, peaceful method, peaceful way. This is the U.S. position. So, what is the solution we should look for? We should seek. Obviously, solution must be peaceful, but also it must be fair, it must be democratic, and also it must be lasting. But who should be the ultimate last arbitrator of this dispute? Let us examine the claim forwarded about Taiwan. Both government in Taiwan and current government in both government in Peking and Taiwan put forward the same argument in arguing Taiwan should be a part of China. It is ironic that those enemies, two enemies in the civil war, is in total agreement as to why Taiwan should be a part of China, although they are talking about a different China. There are three main arguments put forward by them. First, the fact that the majority of the population in Taiwan, majority of 20 million population in Taiwan are ethnically Chinese descendants, which is true, the first point. Second point, as I mentioned, until the end of 19th century, China claimed Taiwan was a part of Chinese province, which is quite true, although, as I said, China has never exercised effective control of the whole island. Third argument is two statements made during the Second World War in 1943, Cairo Declaration, and 1945, Potsdam Proclamation, the same content. So let's examine those main three arguments forwarded by two governments to claim Taiwan should be a part of China. I think the first two arguments is utterly nonsense. The fact that the immigrants or majority of population in Taiwan is a descendant of Chinese immigrants, although it's a fact, but I don't think in modern time this could be the basis for any territorial claim. If each state started claiming that the population ethnically is the same as this nation state, I think whole world will go upside down. Whole world map would have to be redrawn. Second, the fact that China or Taiwan once, according to Chinese view, a part of China, although even we concede that's a part of China. Again, this could not be the basis of any territorial claim. Again, if any state started claiming that a certain part of the earth 100 years ago was this country's territory and started to say this should belong to us, then I think, again, world will go upside down. Whole world map have to be redrawn. So I think these two arguments is not worth mentioning. The third argument, third basis forwarded, that the two documents, basically the same content, this Cairo Declaration and Potsdam Proclamation in 43 and 45, is true. Those statements said Taiwan would be given to China after the Second World War. But as you know, those are not treaty. Those are simply the policy statement made during the war. At that time, nobody knows which side would win the war. So a statement was made in 43 and 45, but those statement was never been implemented. There's no legal document which implemented those statements. In other words, no one can provide any document which say Taiwan should belong China, should legally belong China. No such document exists. So I would say Chinese claim, territorial claim over Taiwan is as good as Iraq territorial claim of Iraq over Kuwait. If we are talking about a fair, democratic, peaceful solution of issue, is it fair that the fate of 20 million people in Taiwan should be decided by a couple of 90-year-old communists in Peking who has never set a foot on Taiwan, who even can't speak a word of Taiwanese? Is it fair? It is democratic that Taiwan's 20 million people's fate should be decided by them. It is not a little bit presumptuous for those couple of octogenarians in Peking to say they have the right to decide, sitting in Peking, the fate of 20 million people. This is a question. So, if we are really looking for a peaceful, democratic, fair, lasting solution of this issue, I believe that the existence and the wish and aspiration of the people who live there should be respected, must be taken very seriously. 20 million, although not comparable to US population or Russian population, but still 20 million, this population in terms of number ranks 37th in the world in about over 100 nation states in the world. It ranked 37. It is, as I said, by now, is one of the most industrialized, socially developed country in Asia, even by world standard. Its per capita income is 20 times larger than one in China. The ratio of college graduate in Taiwan is 10 times larger than in China. But politically, for a long time, those people have been the pawn in the world power politics. Whoever won the war, Taiwan was given to the winner as a prize. Those people always have been forced to accept the outside power as ruler. They have never had say on their future. I believe it is about time that those people should be let speak out, and their wish and aspiration should be respected. In other words, they should be the ultimate, final arbitrator of this dispute on this issue. I have been advocating the solution of this problem in accordance with the principle of self-determination for many years. Why this principle of self-determination could not be accepted by Chinese? Of course, there is a cynicism, there is a greed for power involved. But one of the main fundamental difficulty is those almost feudalistic, anachronistic mentality of Chinese leaders with regard to the notion of modern nation state. It is almost impossible for them to understand that modern nation state is formed not on the basis of biological or ethnical origin of the population or cultural or linguistic affinity. Not so. Modern nation state is formed based on historical sense of common destiny, of shared interest. It is very hard, impossible for them to understand that, to distinguish. It's impossible for them to distinguish the ethnic origin, biological origin, or cultural, linguistic origin on one hand, and politics and law in others. It's impossible for them to understand. They always insist that if you are ethnically, linguistically, culturally Chinese, you must be Chinese politically, legally as well. If it is all right for individual Chinese to leave China and for their personal reason, personal aspiration, personal convenience, personal development, personal prosperity, to immigrate to other countries, to become other countries' citizens, like US citizens, if it is all right, then why it is not all right that a group of Chinese, ethnic Chinese immigrant or Chinese descendants for the same reason, for their collective aspiration, collective convenience, collective prosperity, for their collective development, to form a political entity separate from China. Why it is wrong? Chinese, ethnical Chinese could be anywhere. Ethnical Chinese anywhere in the world could be proud of their ethnic or their cultural heritage, like Irish American or Italian American could be proud of their Italian or Irish heritage. But this one thing is quite another, that all Chinese or must be legally or politically Chinese. No one in the States, I believe most of Irish American or Italian, they clearly distinguish this ethnic or cultural heritage and political and legal their preference. This is a distinction very difficult for Chinese leader to understand. As I said, I have been advocating the solution of Taiwan problem based on principle of self-determination for many years. For that, I have paid certain price, but I am not dependent at all, and I have no reason to apologize for it. Thank you.
I think we'll turn to Director General Zhang next, if he doesn't mind, and then we'll leave Ambassador Lilly to tie together all the pieces. Either sit here or stand, whichever you prefer.
Okay. Bill, it's very kind of you to give me this first opportunity to respond to Dr. Pan's speech. I have several questions as to what Dr. Pan has just said. He said the Chinese government on mainland China has never had effective control since Qing dynasty of Taiwan Island. But I don't know whether this effective control is the prerequisite for the sovereignty, and how effective is effective. As Dr. Pan said, all the people now living in Taiwan went to Taiwan either in 1949 or several hundred years before that. And they went to Taiwan for economic reasons. They came from Fujian province, which is mountainous and poor, which is not very good for agriculture. And they went there for economic reasons. And they had their loyalty to the Qing government. And the Qing government has set up the government governing Taiwan. And they even built a railroad and schools before the Japanese occupation. Therefore, I don't think the Qing dynasty didn't have the effective control is a reason to say that Qing dynasty had no sovereignty over Taiwan. Another thing I want to mention is, Dr. Pan said, the nationalist government of Taiwan has the fiction and the myth about a unified China, that the government represents China. I don't think it's a myth. If you talk to some people about the crumbling of Berlin Wall or the disintegration of USSR, they will say, well, are you crazy? It's a myth. It's impossible. Soviet Russia is biggest power. It's the only two powers on the world. How come you can imagine the Berlin Wall would crumble and the USSR would disintegrate? But it happened within 1 year. When Hitler's Wehrmacht swept over Europe, and de Gaulle went to England, and the French Parliament, it's not Parliament, French National Assembly, Assemblée Nationale, still in Paris. And these surrendered. General Pétain surrendered. He's the leader of the French Republic. And General de Gaulle has no control of France at all. Only those African colonies, Chad, Niger, Senegal, Togo, Dahomey, still consider de Gaulle as the leader of free France. At that time, in 1940, 41, you people told de Gaulle, well, it's in part with the myth that you can beat back Hitler's army and reestablish a free government in Paris. Nobody would believe in him. By 1944, with the Allied army landing in Normandy and pushing forward, very fastly, the Third Reich was in ruins. History is a long period, a string of facts. China has a long history of 5,000 years. Therefore, you can't determine whether this is a myth or its conviction just in a very short period. And Dr. Peng also said, although Chinese immigrants went to Taiwan, this is not a reason that Taiwan should be part of China. And Taiwan has never been effectively ruled, and the Taiwanese has been occupied by outside forces after it won a war. But I think it's not quite right historically to see so. The Manchu government didn't win a war to rule Taiwan. Of course, Japanese government did took over Taiwan after 1895. China was forced to sign a treaty by Li Hongzhang to cede Taiwan involuntarily. And he also said the declaration in Cairo and in Potsdam is only a declaration statement. It's not a treaty. Therefore, the Taiwan's status is still undecided. But after the Second World War, the Republic of China's government went to Taiwan with a warm welcome of the people of Taiwan. During 50 years of rule, they went back to China to join the army or to advocate to overrule of Japanese rule. And they welcomed the government to take over Taiwan. I would like to say voluntarily. It's not occupation force. If Dr. Peng can give me any example of the initial welcoming is false or is untrue, I would like to respond to that too. And since 1945, the government of the Republic of China effectively provide service, political guidance, always having the interest of people in its heart. That's why Taiwan now is what Dr. Peng has just mentioned, one of the economic powers in the world. That's a fruit achieved with full cooperation of the government and the people. A saved people cannot achieve that. This is very sure. And I don't see why there's any need for the people in Taiwan, since they elected the mayors since 1951, 2 years after the nationalist government lost China. In 1957, there are elections for county magistrate. And there are a string of elections since then. The people have fully expressed their opinions. They are not an unsaved nation. They are happy people. Every visitor who went to Taiwan can witness that. There is a democratic government, though not so ideal, not so perfect as Dr. Peng would want it to be. But it's embarked on the road, a democratic road, with approval of the free countries. Since they can express their views with such democratic institution, why they have to express themselves by other means, which can be termed as self-determination? Determine what? I would like to ask. We have the government. Before the end of this year, there will be an election for the National Assembly, which will amend the Constitution next year. And before the end of next year, there will be a national election for the legislators, that is, the congressmen and the senators. And the Constitution will be amended according to the will of the people. And the elections will be held year after year. Therefore, I think Taiwan has been changed a great deal since Dr. Peng left there. Therefore, I still can see why there should be certain means of self-determination. Now there are a lot of people talking about unification of China. What my government is talking about is not immediate unification, which the people on Taiwan don't agree, because the difference, the gap across Taiwan Strait is so huge, it will be unfair for us to be put down to their living standard, to sacrifice the civil rights, the political rights the people in Taiwan are now happily enjoying. Therefore, we say we should recognize each other as political entities on equal basis. We will solve our problems of smuggling, of crime. We should help each other in our economy. This is the very first phase. On the second phase, we'll treat each other as equal partners. We might think about more interflow of people and goods across the street. On the very third phase, we can talk about the political unification. That's when, only when the living standard of mainland China is approximately close to ours, when people over there enjoy political freedom, equality, they have a democratic form of government, And then, only then, we can talk about political unification. Then maybe 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, maybe a century away. Then we don't have to worry about that. The road the government on Taiwan is choosing is a reasonable, logic, very careful, and having the best interest of its people in her heart. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Lilly, the last word is yours until we open for questions.
Can I deliver it from here?
Your choice.
All right. I can tell you that in May of 1989, when I was on my way to Peking, if somebody had said to me, you'd be sitting 2.5 years hence on a stage with Professor Peng Min and Director General James Zhang, I'd have laughed in his face. And I think that's the measure of the way things have changed. I think that's all to the good. But, you know, I was reminded of a story the other day that I was told by a fellow diplomat, which is an absolutely true story. And they said that President Bush got very disturbed when the 19-gun salute for a visiting African dignitary did not go off on time, and he was fuming at his director of protocol. And the dean of the diplomatic corps, a Latin American, said, really, Mr. President, you shouldn't worry too much, because when the premier of the People's Republic of China came to my country, we played the other anthem. And he said, relax. And I think that this incredible tension that one feels and the enormous sensitivity in the feelings of the 1.1 billion Chinese people, which I've heard ad nauseum through the years, what I sense now is more of a relaxation in the process. And the United States' role, as described by Professor Peng, is accurate. The United States has made certain statements. But I would like to deal with not so much what people say as what they do. And the United States, in its association with Taiwan, in my view, it's one of the proudest chapters in American East Asian history. When I arrived there as a young officer in 1952, in the midst of the Korean War, Taiwan was an absolute basket case. This land of plenty was dependent upon the American dole. It had just been driven off the mainland. The refugees were there, carpetbaggers they called them. There had been the great massacre of 1947, which had created tension between the population and the government. And it was really a mess. And the Americans had written it off as a bad case, a disastrous civil war in China which had been lost. And then I come back 30 years later, and what do you see? You see a fantastic success story with the problems of modernization, crime, pollution, overcrowding, but enormous material progress. And that's what struck me. That kind of progress, as Director General Zhang pointed out, not a per capita income 20 times that on China. By what right does the system in China have any justification to export its system to Taiwan? It doesn't make any sense, any more than, in my view, to export their system to Hong Kong or to any other country. The formulation they come up with is, of course, one country, two systems. I say fine. I think that's good. But let's talk about one country, two systems. First, let's have two systems coming together that the process has to be both voluntary and peaceful. Let's have an expansion of this thought that Deng Xiaoping put out in 1984. This is now 7 years later. The world has changed. Let's develop it. Let's have it free and voluntary. I think that's pretty worldwide. The Canadians do this in Quebec. We do it in Puerto Rico. We did it in the Pacific Island Trust States. It's done. It's an acceptable way of unification or not unification. Second, I agree with Director General Zhang. Why shouldn't it be reciprocal and equal? Do we have to really live in the shadow of 19th century concepts of sovereignty? Don't we have new formulations that have developed in the 20th century? Haven't we seen the EC come together as voluntary states, sovereign states, sacrificing a degree of sovereignty to work together? The Soviets may be a negative example, but you do see new formulations of people permitting independence, voluntary association, economic coming together. Why do the Chinese have to be stuck in the 19th century? Can't we look at these new formulations of association? Even the Chinese themselves, Hu Yaobang, God rest his soul, raised in 1984, can we have a commonwealth? A commonwealth is sovereign states working together. That's not a bad idea. It needs expansion. Let's work on it. And finally, I think that the process should be peaceful, voluntary, it should be reciprocal, equal. And why can't you, in the interests of the people, because we hear lots about democracy in China, why can't the unifying force be freedom and democracy in a China that comes together? We will look at other formulations of association, but this process can be worked out if you liberate your mind. Now, what you have, I think, is some interesting developments going on in China. But before I get to that, let's talk about the U.S. role. It seems to me quite clear that the U.S. has been in this beginning. We were very instrumental in an advanced, well-thought-through aid program that was terminated in mid-'65, and then Taiwan took off. But it was an aid program that had learned the lessons of our tragedy in the mainland in the 40s. We applied it carefully. We applied it to land reform. We applied it to export promotion, industrial development, infrastructure development. It took off. It seeded the economic success of Taiwan. But Taiwan did it without us, because '65 is when they really started taking off. And I think this was a very judicious application of U.S. support for Taiwan. But we came in after that continually, emphasizing that we insisted that we wanted this solution of the Taiwan situation to be done between the Chinese themselves, and that it had to be peaceful. In fact, President Reagan said that very precisely in '82, when he said the Taiwan question is a matter for the Chinese people on both sides of the Taiwan Straits to resolve. We will not interfere in this matter or prejudice the free choice or put pressure on the people of Taiwan in this matter. We have an abiding interest and concern that any resolution be peaceful. I shall never waver from this fundamental position. But you didn't just talk about it, you did something about it. You negotiated an arms deal that the PRC had to accept. No other nation in the world has done this. And we have continued to provide Taiwan the technology and the arms to develop a very strong, well-organized, well-disciplined armed force with fighter aircraft, frigates, tanks, helicopters, anti-submarine warfare aircraft that can be used against anything that China can put up, backed up by the power of the 7th Fleet. And if anybody is thinking of a Kuwait solution, I think they ought to talk to Saddam Hussein. Because it seems to me that the power that the United States projects into the Pacific through CINCPAC in Hawaii, through the extension of the 7th Fleet, through the home porting in Japan, through the dispositions in Korea, is a statement that the United States is there and we mean to stay, and we've got the teeth to back up what we say. And I think after the Persian Gulf War, anybody that doubts that resolve had better think twice. That the protestations of the continuing use of force, I think, sound increasingly hollow in the face of that. And I think everybody who's a realist knows that. I'm told that Yang Shangkun and Deng Xiaoping spent Chinese New Year's in Shanghai watching the Persian Gulf on CNN. I think that's all to the good. The United States has, over the years, developed certain policies, I think, that have been reasonably successful. And in the Taiwan situation, we have a number of pillars, bases for what we do. We first have the Taiwan Relations Act, which has been mentioned tonight, which is probably the most brilliant piece of legislation developed by the Congress on any country in the world, as far as I'm concerned. I'm a little bit parochial on this one. But it has in it the statements that back up the American position to support peace on Taiwan. It's quite unequivocal. It's stronger than most of our mutual security treaties. You do not have to refer to Congress or congressional processes to carry it out. I think that's very important. I think everybody understands it's an acceptable instrument of policy right now. So number two, as I said before, we don't just talk about it. We continually support the military development in Taiwan, more than any other country in the world. In fact, at one point, the only country in the world. And we stood by that, and we've stood by that in the face of domestic pressure in the United States and extraordinary pressure from the PRC, which threatened to pull down the whole relationship, PRC-US, over this issue. President Reagan stood firm, and we went through. Number three, I think it's very important for the stability in the Taiwan Straits and to resolve this thing peacefully, to have reasonably balanced relationships between the United States and China. Because China has to have a good, strong stake in a good relationship with the United States. I think that exists now. It's being eroded somewhat because we've gotten considerably tougher on them. But still, with an $11 billion trade surplus for beginners, they have a real stake in keeping us happy. Then I think another factor that's come up in the last couple of years that's very important is the burgeoning relationship between the PRC and Taiwan. I mean, the numbers are mind-boggling. 10 million pieces of mail last year, 2 million visitors, 3,000 joint ventures, 4 billion in trade. It's big-time stuff, and it's having an impact on all of South China. That's a very important thing. A graduate of Harvard Law School was just in Beijing last month talking to the vice premier. And he was talking about very specific issues: smuggling, illegal immigration, and fishing disputes. And he got a lot of things solved. There was a lot of motion in the contact between the two. Carefully, judiciously, and well argued and well supported. These processes are going on. They're going on quickly, and they are going on well, and each side is preserving its identity. Finally, I think the new ingredient that has come into this whole process that's very important today is the fact that after Tiananmen, Beijing receded into its past in terms of its political development. A tragic thing happened. Political dogma took over. The four cardinal principles, what you genuflected before every morning. It became a dogmatic country, heavily militarized, 12% increase in the military budget, dependent upon the military to subdue elements that go against outside the system to change the government. This happened in Tibet, Xinjiang, and Tiananmen. Not just in Tiananmen. The message is clear. In contrast, as my learned colleagues have pointed out, National Assembly elections, revision of Constitution, legislative UN elections, arguments between people, debate between Director General Zhang, Professor Peng. Should you have a direct election of the president? Should you elect the mayors of Taipei and Kaohsiung? Should you elect the governor of Taiwan? These are the issues that are being debated. It's all about power sharing, and they're talking about it largely democratically. That is a pleasure to see. When I was in Taiwan in 82 to 84, this didn't exist. But a very wise man at that time, named President Jiang Jingguo, said that he saw 4 areas for the future of Taiwan. And he said this with some vision. He said, I see democracy, I see Taiwanization, I see prosperity, and I see a working relationship with the mainland. And all of these things have over the years have come to pass. I think that's good news. I do think we have to be concerned about any kind of a single-minded pursuit of, let's say, an independence formulation. You have what the European nations that have declared independence don't have. Taiwan has the autonomy. It has the separate government. It has the separate military. It has separate installations all over the world. What it lacks is what the Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, and the others have verbally. But they don't have the independence Taiwan has in terms of its position. They're just, you can't compare the two. Taiwan's light years ahead. So to get caught in this sort of I word, independence, and locked into it, what you're really talking about, I think, is what Dr. Peng is talking about. Let the people speak. You cannot have the assimilation of one country by another through forceful means. You cannot do it against the will of the people. It must be something that is supported. And you mention the word plebiscite, it's almost like the streets disappear. You do it in Hong Kong, they don't want to even talk about it yet. And still in Taiwan, it isn't really a major point. But I think you're beginning to see people talk about creative solutions. The Minister of Economic Affairs in Taiwan suggested on 4 November, later denied, but I'm sure he did. Why not a free market? Here we have the dynamic trends that are coming, and this is what excites me more than all of the Talmudic arguments about who owns Taiwan or what this sort of thing is. I don't think the 8 old mortals in Beijing can decide this. They aren't anymore. Yang Shangkun's statements this year in October, when the DPP announced its platform, he just got it back from Hao Bei-tsun. I don't see that these sort of bellicose statements make a lot of difference, especially given the realities of the military capabilities. But I think the real trends are the ones we have to watch. And I see these as really threefold. First is you have the Hong Kong PRC arrangements. You have the astronomical growth of Hong Kong influence in Guangdong province. I mean, again, the numbers boggle your mind. You're talking about millions of Chinese workers working in 10,000s of enterprises that are creative and outproducing the North China by 4 to 1. The message is clear where growth in China is. It's in Jiangsu and Zhejiang, in the village and township enterprises. Largely, it's in Guangdong and Fujian through the influence of Fujian from Taiwan and Hong Kong. And you have a whole pattern taking place in China that's changing the whole economic balance between North and South, between province and center. This is what you have to watch. This is where the real dynamism is. And it's linked between Hong Kong, South China, and Taiwan. And the Minister of Economic Affairs has already acknowledged this. I think second, as I mentioned to you, the growth in Taiwan PRC, relationships, exchanges, the Santongs make no sense anymore, the 3 communications, because these have been overtaken by events. You have all this mail, you're going to have direct shipping and direct flights probably within a year. You had the visitors, you had the exchanges, you have the various establishments in each country coming. All that's going to happen. It's a dynamic that will be very hard to stop. When the PRC tried to stop it on illegal immigrants, it was changed very quickly. They accepted it, and in October it was carried out. On the 24th, 240 were sent back from Taiwan via Matsu. Then the third dynamic is the changing relationship between South China and the center. I mentioned earlier the sheer numbers of this thing. I'm not saying that China's going to break apart. It is not. They've worked too hard to build the unity that they've achieved. But you're going to have centrifugal forces at work. And you've got to be able to follow these very carefully to see where our interests are served and see where the interests in China are served. I think it's very important, though, that we stick to principles that we've had all along. And even in World War II, when President Roosevelt talked about China after the war, he said, a free, united, and democratic China. He got 2/3 of it. Today, we really say we are looking towards a free and democratic China. We believe that those principles are much more important and will get much more world support for the position of Taiwan than indulging in the I word. That you can work within the framework of a changing relationship between the United States and the PRC. And I'd just like to explain to you how this relationship between China and the PRC has changed so significantly in the last 20 years. Just briefly, in 1971, when we came into China, Zhou Enlai, the great poker player and diplomatist, laid out the 3 conditions for the advancement of Chinese-American relations. Taiwan remained an obstacle in the relationship caused by the United States' interference in the Chinese internal affairs. Second, the United States and China should work together to combat Soviet hegemonism. Third, that China was going to modernize and that the United States had a role in the modernization of China, which was in our mutual interest, and therefore the United States should relax export controls on China. That was their agenda from 1971 to 89. And they could drag out the Taiwan obstacle, the Taiwan albatross, the Taiwan issue, and stick it at you at periodic times and threaten to pull down the whole relationship if it wasn't managed right. That's gone. The principles of our relationship with China as of December 1990 are threefold, and there are principles. Number one, it's human rights. Number two, it's proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And number three, it's trade inequities. And those are the issues that Secretary Baker pushed on. Those are the issues we will pursue. And it seems to me that within this framework, Taiwan has a great deal of maneuvering room to take care of its internal situation, to work out democratically the differences that exist over direct elections, over participation, over economic distribution, over participation overseas. These things can be worked out by men of goodwill. As far as we Americans are concerned, I think we have an abiding interest in seeing Taiwan flourish the way it has, to remain at peace with the mainland, and at the same time, we see advantage to the United States in maintaining a stable and tranquil relation with the PRC. Thank you very much.
Let us take some questions. I ask that people who wish to ask questions go to one of the two microphones on each side, and if you'd like, please identify your name and affiliation. Yes.
Yeah, my name is Kizen Tan. I'm in the mathematics department in Columbia University in New York. I just want to remind everyone tonight that there are just 4 young persons sentenced about 2 years each because of their advocating of Taiwan independence. Besides this, there are still a lot of people, Taiwanese, in jail. For instance, Dr. Guo Beihong and Dr. Li Yingyuan. And so if the KMT government, this foreign government has...
Is this a question or a statement? Because of time, I ask that you put a question to one of our panelists.
I have a petition, actually. Because if this KMT government have the confidence that they can unify the mainland sometime, why do they want to punish these people for that. My petition is to the chairman, because the above person mentioned in jail, at least 3 of them are previous graduate students in USA, and they got trouble because they exercise their freedom of speech here. So I just ask you, if some Taiwanese here don't feel comfortable to reveal their name, just don't ask them to do so.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Of course.
Yeah, thanks.
Do you have a question? Okay, take our next question, please.
My name is Ping Zizhu. Since Mr. Zhang accused Dr. Peng of leaving Taiwan for a long time, so I want to indicate that I came to USA 1 year ago, and I returned to Taiwan this summer. I think every person living in Taiwan knows after the election of this year, the KMT government want to use his member in the Congress to constitutionalize the martial law. And I want to ask Mr. Zhang, do you have some comment on this part? And I also want to, since all the 3 speakers think the people in Taiwan can speak out their feeling, then I want to speak out my opinion.
No, you asked a question. Let's give Director General Zhang a chance to answer, and then we have a line of other people. Director General Zhang, do you?
Okay.
I don't quite accustomed to his English, therefore I try to guess what he said about that. He said, accuse Dr. Peng. I didn't accuse anybody. Yeah, I didn't accuse anybody, first of all. And you talk about the Kuomintang government. The Kuomintang is composed of most of the local people. And some people were being now you're talking about 4 people now who has got trouble because of their free speech. According to our criminal law, the paragraph 2 of the 100 Article 100, anyone who engaged in the preparatory stage or conspiracy stage of sedition will be punishable by law. That's the law. Now it's excuse me, let me finish, okay? Now they were being dealt with according to law, due process for law. Now they're going to appeal. It's not finished yet. Therefore, I'm not going to comment on this because it's in the legal process.
Let us take speaker over here.
Yeah, hi. I'm an English grad student here. My name is Margaret. This question is for Mr. Lilly and Mr. Chang. It seems to me that it's more on the level of language here. It seems to me that both of you seem to build on this binary opposition between China and Taiwan and say, well, let's have a reciprocal, equal relationship. And my question is, how do you define the word equal? Because for me, it's like the white man saying to the black man saying, we're all equal. I mean, you don't need my help. You know, you live in a little shack. I live in this great mansion with a lot of money, but we're all equal and we need to talk on equal terms. What exactly do you mean by equal?
Well, I don't think the parallel of the white and the black man exactly fits the pattern, unless you're talking about Taiwan being superior to China and talking down to it. If you're raising that, I don't think that's the problem. My sense is that equality is when you sit down, C.V. Chun with his counterpart of the Straits Exchange Foundation in Beijing, and talk as equals. And negotiate the thing as equals. Or the next step would be, let's say, of legislators getting together, meeting the head of the internal committee of the Taiwan Legislative Yuan and that of China, meeting as equals to discuss problems. And at the appropriate time, I think Li Donghui's 3-stage approach makes some sense. It could be accelerated or slowed down as things meet. At some point, you'll be talking as equals, perhaps at the premier level. And you'll sit down and you'll talk about how to work out your trade problems, how to break down trade barriers, how to handle your crime problems, how to open up the markets, how to all these things. I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, what I'm talking about equal is the communist regime, in China, is reality. They consider us as a local government. They consider themselves as big brother. But my talking about equality means we are both political entities, equal political entities, although Taiwan is much smaller than mainland China. But we are much superior in a lot of things, in other fields. Therefore, we want to be on equal footing with them. If we have something to discuss about, some problem to solve, that's what I mean, equality.
I guess I'm speaking more like an English major here when, I ask you to define the word equal because you seem to have this desire to transcend this historical facts, the historical past where China, 5,000 years, great civilization, Taiwan, 400 years, and,
No.
and it seems to be that in Mr. Lily's speech, that you start always with China.
Is this a question, please?
Okay. My next question is...
Is it only a follow-up on this one?
Yeah.
Can I just raise one
how
point?
do you
If you want to
locate-
raise years, you have your 5,000 years of Chinese history and 400 years in Taiwan. Let me remind you of one fact. You have the first democratic government in China in 4,000 years on Taiwan. That's coming close to it.
My question is, how do you locate? You seem to talk about this essentialist humanist position where we're both human beings. It doesn't matter what, if Taiwan is a little small, China is a little big, and China has a lot of arms. Taiwan is capitalist, very rich. How do you locate that essence of we're both equal? I mean, it seems hard for me to define that essence here.
Well,
Do you
I
know
don't
what
quite
I'm
understand
saying?
why someone bigger, taller than you cannot be equal partner with you. And when I talk about 5,000 years of China's culture, about the 400 years of immigrant history, I don't compare these two things together. It's not irrelevant. Therefore, I still don't get your point. I don't know whether our moderator understands what you are talking about.
We can add another question because there are such a large number of people who wish to ask questions. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Celine Coe. I'm an undergraduate here. My question is to Mr. Lilly. You were talking about the issue of human rights, and Director General Zhang said that these poor people who are being dealt with within the law. How do you feel about the blacklisting policy towards U.S. citizens, Taiwan nationals, who felt like they had to leave Taiwan in order to express their ideas on the Taiwan independence movement, and how they can be denied visas to Taiwan, and how they're treated when they return to Taiwan?
Well, you have a very long question, and I don't quite, it's not quite clear to me. Can you repeat your question? Can you come closer, or you make a...
Sorry, I'm too short.
Yeah, I think it's directed toward Ambassador Lilly.
Towards Ambassador Lilly. Thank you. I want to know how you feel about the KMT government's policy towards U.S. citizens who are Taiwan nationals. Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, I've just come from China, where Wang Juntao and Chen Ziming were sent to jail for 13 years. Not this 2-year stuff, and not an appeal.
What about
And so
Professor
I'm working with
Chen
relative
Wen-chen?
situations.
People have been killed.
I'm not downplaying your situation, but I'm saying you always have to think about other conditions that are not quite as good as yours. And I think that I'm not saying that Taiwan is a Jeffersonian democracy, but I'm saying that WUFI, World United for Formosan Independence, is thinking of moving its headquarters back into Taiwan. I'm talking to you about Xu Xinliang, that 3 years ago was arrested and today is head of the DPP. I'm talking about Yao Jiawan, and I'm talking about Yo Qing, and people like this who were all in jail when I was there, and now they're out. And now they're defending themselves, and they're outspoken, and they're going right into the foreign ministry and giving me papers right in front of the foreign minister on their position on Taiwan independence. Now, I'm not saying it's a unbroken line towards democracy, but I'm saying there has been one big change since I was there in '84, and it's a lot better.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let us
Yes.
turn over here for our next question.
Hi, my name is Linda Liu, and I'm an undergraduate at Harvard. My question is for Dr. Peng. As a Taiwanese American, I'm very excited by the prospect of a Taiwanese independence. My family here, they receive newscasts regularly on what's going on between the KMT and the Minjindang. And one of the things that disturbs me greatly is the fact that part of the Minjindang's tactics seem to include a lot of violence. We've seen telecasts of tables being overturned and members of the KMT being beaten. Could you address this? I mean, what is the official policy of Minjindang, and is anything being done to curb this?
Well, I think the real issue in Taiwan, in my view, is not whether Taiwan should be independent or not. I think the real issue is whether those people have the right to self-determine, to determine their own fate. I think this is a question. And if the majority of the people want to be independent, why not? And if the majority of the people want to be the part of China, it's all right. That is nice. And talking about DPP's independent, open platform, this is a matter of, I cannot speak for DPP, but I think, of course, this is controversial, whether this is either good strategy, even from those in support of independence, whether it is a good tactic. It is controversial, and it's a political thing. So I couldn't speak for them. But as you know, the pro and con of this tactic is being still argued. But I think the basic thing is government attitude. Government shouldn't, I think a couple of people say that, shouldn't regard those advocate self-determination as a treason. This is the point. Of course, Ambassador Lili said things are improving. Of course, it has been improving. But still, I think as a principle, government has not accepted the people has a right to determine their own future, whether it's independent or not. This is another matter. This is my point.
I'm sorry, maybe my question wasn't very clear. There are a lot of people here that I've spoken to who support what the Minjindang is trying to achieve, government for the people. But your tactics, or the Minjindang's tactics, when you see telecasts in the United States of people beating other people and overturning tables, is there a discussion of maybe changing that? If you go by it in a more peaceful way, I think you're prone to find more support. I mean, you're bound to find more support abroad.
I couldn't.
Oh, she.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand.
Violence by the people.
Huh?
Violence by the Minjindang. I think that's what she's worried about. Is it a tactic?
I think, of course, again, I couldn't speak for Minjindang, but I don't think Minjindang advocate violence. I don't think so. Minjindang, the official position is against violence, but things happen because of the government attitude, and so some kind of people go extreme to counter government attitude. So no one, I think, in responsible position in Taiwan or abroad advocate. No responsible people advocate violence.
Thank you.
Mabel?
Thank you. My name is Mabel Chan. I'm a graduate student with the Arts and Sciences School in East Asian Studies program. I have two questions for Mr. Lili. The first one is regarding the latest internal circular among the party cadres. China calls the United States engaging in some kind of quiet revolution. Hi. That's
Peaceful evolution.
Peaceful evolution
Yes.
against China.
Yes.
Given that kind of view of the United States, how can you still call the current relations between the United States and China as good?
No, I said
want
stable
I want to get your reaction on that more. That's question number one. And question number two has to do with your rhetorics about sticking to principle. You were in Beijing and you witnessed Tiananmen massacre. You, I'm sure, were shocked by the events there. And you were there for a number of years. You understand the Chinese minds, and I'm sure you were extremely shocked. Knowing the Chinese communist leaders, the way they operate and the way they can, and the means that they would go to make sure that their powers are secure, how can you trust that they would honor the meaning of one country, two systems, especially with the Hong Kong issue?
All right. I think peaceful evolution, we call that in China fan kung pao, firing empty cannons. If you have a thin skin, get out of the China business. I mean, they have used terms on us that make peaceful evolution sound like a Sunday school prayer. That's the least of the pejorative terms they use on us. How about fascist, imperialist beast, germ warfare dispenser, imperialist warmonger? Those are much stronger. Peaceful evolution, to me, is a softie. I mean, if they say, you Americans are trying to overthrow the socialist system by peaceful means.
Well, they've said that too.
Ghastly.
They've said something like subverting. What? They've said something like that too. They say that you're trying to subvert the communist regime. They've used phrases like that also.
We stand for something in the United States. We stand for freedom and democracy. We stand for free markets and all that sort of thing. If you do that and you carry that message to China, you are trying to overthrow the system. At the same time they say that, they invite 1,500 American teachers into China to teach all over from Baotou to Xizang. At the same time they offer the Fulbrights to come back in and teach all over China. At the same time they offer the Peace Corps to come into Sichuan. At the same time they send international visitors to the United States in greater and greater number. At the same time, half the leading cadre in the Politburo have their kids here.
So the point you're making...
what you're dealing with is hypocrisy. Blatant
I just
hypocrisy.
wanted to hear that from you.
And if you want a clean-cut answer to that, you aren't going to get it, because we've been playing this game with them for 40 years. And I think in the second thing on Tiananmen on principle, I don't feel uncomfortable about the position the United States took. We were the toughest on China of any nation in the world. We were the first that acted, and we acted very decisively and very strongly. And we took the leading dissident in China and gave him protection in defiance of them. And he left China a free man with his integrity intact. And we sat there and we took all kinds of harassment for months and months, children, women, particularly, while this was going on. I'm not saying these guys are Boy Scouts. I fought them in Korea. I fought them in Laos. I know how to fight. I'd rather not fight. I'd rather do it this way. I'd rather do it the peaceful evolution way. and I think that basically, I suppose we in China who have seen and read history of Qin Shi Huangdi and the building of the Great Wall and the destruction of the scholars and the books, or the Taiping Rebellion, or the Boxer Rebellion, or the Great Leap Forward, or the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, when millions and millions of people died in social engineering projects. Of course Tiananmen is a tragedy, but in the stream of Chinese history, it was another event demonstrating that you're dealing with a power that has different perceptions than we do. And you have to make a decision whether you're going to deal with them or not. And this decision was made a long time ago that we would. But I think the important thing that I'm saying is the agenda has changed. It's not the Chinese beating up on us over the so-called Taiwan obstacle. It's us beating up on them over human rights. And I think that's a very significant change. And that happened in the last 1.5 years.
But what kind of responses do you get? Okay, well, before this question, but the last...
responses? I hope Dai Qing's going to be a Neiman Fellow here next year. That's one.
Well, the last but not the least part of my question was unanswered. It's about one country, two systems. It's very important.
I said one country, two systems. How about the process being free and democratic and voluntary and peaceful? Let's change it. Let's expand the thought. Dong, that was great thought in 1984 when you gave it, but I've got a few suggestions how you can make it better. Let's have the process freedom, free and voluntary. Let's have it between equals.
Let us take another question.
So, I mean, I think I've answered that question, really. That's what you do with one country, two systems.
We don't
you improve on it.
have a little of our own. Anyway, Elsa, could you please...
Yes, I'm a first-year MPP student here at the Kennedy School. And, well, as we know, Secretary Lilly, you're obviously a strong advocate of democracy. And Professor Peng, you spoke about extensive self-determination. Yet I hear contradicting views on what self-determination might bring. Dr. Peng, you said that the people in Taiwan, out of the 20 million, 85% are Taiwanese, and they're dissatisfied and they're complaining. Yet, Mr. Tsang, you said that people are not just satisfied, but they're happy. So I'm just curious, Dr. Peng, Mr. Tsang, what do you think the outcome would be if there were some sort of widespread, plebiscite in Taiwan about what kind of government there should be? Do you think there would be significant changes?
Since Dr. Feng is not ready to answer your question, I would like to offer my answer. According to our current political system, there's no plebiscite. And what I mentioned earlier, that we are going to have a National Assembly election. And they are going to amend the Constitution. And next year, before the end of next year, we're going to have the election of legislators. At that time, they can, through the legislators, express their views about the political system, economic improvement, whatever, social justice. I think they can achieve the same result as plebiscite, because we don't have such. Here you have Proposition 4 or 3. We don't have that in the system. That's my answer.
Let's take one or two more questions, but see if our panelists first have other comments on that one. Take one or two more questions, then we will be having a reception at which you may more informally also pursue questions. Yes, please. You've been waiting patiently.
I'm Penny Geis. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. Ambassador Lilly, you made some rather strong warnings to the People's Republic, it seemed to me, against the possibility that they would take military action against Taiwan. If that wasn't what you intended, just say no. And if it was, I would like to hear your comments about what you think the real danger of that is, and I would also like to hear both of the other gentlemen comment on whether they think that is a real and imminent danger. Thank you.
Well, I don't think I've said anything that really contradicts the policy statements that are contained in the Taiwan Relations Act and what President Reagan made in 1982. I've amplified on them and creatively amplified on them a bit. And I suppose as a private citizen for a few days longer, I've got that prerogative to do this. I got to be muzzled in about 3 days. But it seems to me that the use of force to bring about unification historically has been an absolute disaster. The Russians are paying the price for it today. The Yugoslavs are paying the price. It doesn't make any sense that any country can even consider using force. We used force to prevent the splitting up of the United States in 1861 to 1865. It was the bloodiest war in our history. We survived it, but I would hate to ever go through anything like that again. Civil wars have been the worst wars. The Chinese Civil War cost millions and millions of lives. It seems to me anybody even talking about force is living in a dream world, and that kind of thing should stop, and stop now. And I think that we say, you know, I suppose you can make a gag of it. We say, if you don't do it peacefully, we'll blow your head off. The capabilities are there. Everybody knows where the power is. So I don't think you have to go around waving a baseball bat. Maybe a little of Teddy Roosevelt is necessary here. Speak softly and carry a big stick. And I think that everybody knows who has the big stick. And I think that the references to use of force is Fang Kung Pao in spades.
Dr. Peng or Director John, Dr. Peng, would you like to comment on that question? It's directed to all three. Dr. John?
Anyone sitting in Zhongnanhai would wish to have Taiwan presented to them on a silver plate with the so-called 80 billion US dollars foreign exchange, with the productivity, with the richness and everything. As Ambassador Lily just mentioned, the communist regime on mainland China does have the capability to launch an armed attack or blockade on Taiwan. If you remember, during the Second World War, with 50 submarines, Hitler caused a big headache for his Majesty's Navy. And now mainland China has more than 100 submarines, and their force is bigger than ours. They're a bigger army. But of course, we must consider the quality of the armed forces, the will of the people to fight the war. But it would not be to their interest or to the interest of mainland China, the interest of the people in Taiwan, to have any kind of armed conflict happening across the Taiwan Strait. But we have to admit the reality, the possibility. That's why my government is trying to maintain a friendly conduct on equal basis across Taiwan Strait. We don't want any problem being solved other than peaceful means.
Before we take our last question, let me again remind you that there is a reception that will be held in the Institute of Politics living room over there after the last question, with some soft drinks and, more importantly, a chance for people to pursue more privately, more directly questions, comments, etc., that we didn't have time for. Our last question.
I'm Robert Freed. My question, I think, is important for two reasons. First of all, I think it is important. And secondly, I'd like to address it to Ambassador Lilly, because the idea of an MIT graduate asking a Yale graduate a question at Harvard has some great appeal. I just came back from 45 days in China. Every week, the China Daily, which is in English, would state that any move by anyone in Taiwan to speak about independence of Taiwan was criminal. And that everything I read indicated to me some of the things that were said tonight. First of all, the blatant hypocrisy, but that they want Taiwan on an equal footing as equal entities, and the rest of the unwritten part is as long as we control it. So the question that I have is a political and economic question. The first part is the political question. The first Chinese words I learned were mamalai, which I don't pronounce right, but it means very, very slowly it will come. I think that my feeling was the Chinese will use this as a political issue continuously, but that they know we play it like football games, and they're going to wait even if it takes 100 or 200 years, and we'll just keep it as an open question until it's on their side. Is this what they're doing? In other words, will the PLC just talk, or will they wait? Talk and wait, or will there be some action on this? If they went for self-determination, what would the action be? Second part has to do with economics. It seems to me we're supporting, to a large degree, Taiwan. And when I looked at the joint ventures and what is occurring, Hong Kong is 1, I think Taiwan is 2, and Japan is 3 on the joint ventures, and we're nowhere in there. So that as you look at the economic building strength of Taiwan, aren't we losing our position to negotiate economically? And that's the question.
Well, I think factually the United States is ahead of Japan in joint ventures in China, not Hong Kong. Hong Kong's way ahead. They've got 10,000, Taiwan about 3,000. We're a little bit over 1,000. Japan maybe 800 or so. We have a lot of commitment to China in terms of joint ventures, and this is part of peaceful evolution. They can't live with us and they can't live without it, because these are very successful ventures that pay people well, that give them material incentive and reasons to work harder for profit. And I think this is very disturbing. In terms of waiting, I think, again, your comment is interesting, because can the Chinese, with their legendary patience, outwait the impatient Americans and just see this Taiwan thing fall in their lap? All the trends are going against it. All the trends are telling you something else. The trends I cited earlier in terms of the Hong Kong relationship with Guangdong, with the Taiwan relationship with Fujian, with South China outstripping the North. Can you actually impose the kind of 4 cardinal principles on China in 10 years from now? I mean, even in the decade of the 80s, Zhao Ziyang was beginning to pick this thing apart. It was unraveling very quickly. After Tiananmen, they used the economic retrenchment campaign with a good political coloration to bring the country back into ideological conformity and economic flexibility. This is Deng's formula. It goes right back to the 19th century. It's as common as can be. It failed then, it'll fail this time. But this is what they're doing in the face of the overwhelming lessons of the communications revolution at Tiananmen, which told them you can't get away with it anymore. I mean, you can have 16 million people die by social engineering in the Great Leap Forward, and the world doesn't do anything. And you kill 500 to 1,000 people at Tiananmen, and the whole roof caves in on you. It's a very new lesson for China. And but the one thing I think that people can lose sight of is that China is a very conservative country. It's a very reactionary country. And you have huge bodies of the population that are immune from the virus from the West. There's millions and millions. I think John K. Fairbanks said it best when he said, the fine sliver that you Westerns deal with in judging China doesn't deal with the 99% that you never see on the plains of Hunan or in western Sichuan, this sort of thing. And that there is, for instance, this huge group of Chinese that came out of the great northern wilderness, the Beida Huang, that have formed great power networks within China that are committed to a socialist system, that look at this work in the wilderness as some sort of a badge of honor, and that will continue to be bureaucratic servants for whoever runs the system. And there is a huge amount of inertia that I don't think we should get mesmerized by seeing the beautiful people come around and tell us in Congress and at Harvard how democracy flourishes. I mean, when you look at the numbers, it was very impressive, and it scared the old men very much in 1989, because it did have a kinetic effect in China. But at the same time, when a lot of these people went back to their home villages, they were treated like pariahs. They were not acceptable. And it turned out that a lot of the peasantry was buying the line that came out of Beijing, as they buy everything. And it seems to me that you're dealing with this great reactionary thing, that the old men can build on this reactionary force or the latent anti-foreignism. And that's why I worry so much about us being the heavy on MFN and clobbering the industries of South China. And boy, they've got the issue they need on this one. And so it seems to me that there's many things that the United States can do in China. We've made our mistakes. I think we've learned from some of them. I don't think our record is tarnished or disgraceful in any way. I think in Taiwan it's been outstanding. It's been the best record of any country in the world. And I think in the Tiananmen thing, we came through as the strongest country in making our statements. And we have preserved the essence of a strong relationship with both sides, to keep the lines open, to keep those 1,500 students going to China to teach. And they're the best of America. And if they come and say that you guys are on drugs and you read pornography and you're sex maniacs, and these nice young kids go out and they live an austere life for 2 years and teach 40 hours a week and come back here, they're giving a lie to the whole propaganda. VOA's never been more popular. And when I was in the Persian Gulf War, this is my last commercial, the outpouring from the Chinese to support the American position was absolutely overwhelming. 85% supported us by a secret State Council poll. And in came the letters from all over China. One man sent me 10,000 renminbi, his whole life savings. And he said, go get that guy. And when you get through with him, I got some ideas for you. You know, we had a real outpouring. I came away from China with a sense, not just seeing the kids going like this to you when your car with the American flag went by, but talking to the people on the street, bicycle repairmen. I think we're in good shape there. There are obstacles in the short term, but boy, stay in for the long run.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of our speakers, particularly Dr. Peng for coming from Oregon to speak, and our other speakers, and also Christy Wong for arranging all this.